Welcome to The Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. I'm Dan Humby, VP Sales for Europe with Groups 360, co-chair of the European Meetings and Events Committee for GBTA, and also your host for today's episode. I'm delighted to be joined by a couple of my fellow committee members who you're going to get to meet in just a moment. But our plan over the course of the next 25 minutes or so is to walk through some of the most prominent trends in the meetings and events space at the moment and understand how they're impacting program owners and their stakeholders. We're going to start fairly big picture through a macro lens and get into more detail as we move through. But that said, I should acknowledge in the relatively short space of time we've got with you today, we're really only going to scratch the surface of some of these topics, but we'll likely uncover some of those areas which spur greater debate and could provide some more in-depth content for a later episode. So enough from me, let's get on to the folks that we all want to hear from. And first of all, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Pape, Global Meetings and Events Manager with Shell. Jennifer, welcome. Thank you for being here. And it'd be great if you can just give a little context about your responsibilities, where you sit within the organization, so that our listeners get a sense for the perspective you're coming at today's conversation from.
Thanks, Dan, and glad to be here joining. So I am the Global Meeting and Events Manager for Shell. It's a global role. I sit in corporate travel, which forms part of our corporate real estate function. And I'm responsible for adherence to our global meetings policy, all external sourcing for meetings and events. I manage our venue supplier and event management platform as part of the role I have in corporate travel.
Excellent. Great having you here. Thank you, Jennifer. Next up, we've got Jason Hart, Strategic Sourcing Manager with Amgen, also based here in the UK. Thanks to you, Jason. If you can also give our listeners a little context, it'd be appreciated.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me. And yeah, so I'm the Strategic Sourcing Manager for Amgen. I look after multiple categories for the UK and Ireland affiliates and stuff, one of them being meeting and events. And I'm also part of a big regional project for Europe and stuff for transforming our how we do meeting events and how we interact with our agencies and stuff. So that's really exciting on the back of COVID, etc. So yeah, glad to be here.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. Both clearly got a lot on your plate, so we do appreciate you both giving us your time. So without any further ado, let's get into it. But I'll quickly add that we're also going to be layering in some really great industry research to support the dialogue today. And I'll be particularly quoting from the recent 2023 Global Meetings and Events forecast from American Express Meetings and Events, and that's freely available from the GBT website. So we're midway through the year, it gives us the opportunity to look back, see how those early predictions are playing out. Now, within the aforementioned forecast, 66% of respondents anticipated that meeting spend would increase in 2023, and that appears to be playing out in the results that we're seeing and the trends that we're hearing. Both Marriott and Hilton cited the group segment as being a key contributor to strong performance so far this year in their Q1 earnings calls, with increased demand supported by strong rate growth, delivering double-digit revenue increases for the segment. Now, all of these industry-specific trends come against a very well-documented geopolitical backdrop, Eastern Europe in particular, and that sent energy costs spiraling as governments wrestled to sort of keep hold of record levels of inflation. So Jason, I'm going to come to you first with this one, but in short, pricing's up across the board, far beyond traditional travel sectors like hotel and air. So how's this impacting the business first and foremost? And then more specifically, how's it impacting at a program and an event level?
No, it's a really good question. And I think from our side, and also for me, different categories, inflation is a very big topic across all businesses. And yeah, obviously we're seeing an increase, which affects our budgets, not only for this year, but we've already started budgeting for next year and stuff like that. So it's really important that we kind of stay on top of it. I think, the inflation piece, it's it's hard, being from a procurement point of view, you don't just want, the lowest price and that kind of stuff, which is the traditional, procurement thing. It's about working, with our partners and our agencies, and trying to make it work for both parties. I think is the key thing. Understanding that costs have gone up, but where have they gone up? Why? Making sure that we're just asking the right questions, and keeping our suppliers accountable, and just working with them in that partnership kind of thing, because if they're not there, we can't do meeting and events, and and vice versa, right? So it needs to work for both parties, which I think is the key thing.
Yeah, and I think you use the word partnership there. I think so often at this sort of time, it's very easy to kind of prioritize the short-term gains that are out there, particularly off the back of COVID, where suppliers face such losses. But I think it's so important to balance that long-term partnership when you were in supply negotiations at this time. So it's a really tough dynamic, but yeah, it's something that suppliers have to keep in mind at this time.
Yep.
Jennifer, I'll turn to you, and we'll kind of stick with this topic. But the M&E sector, in its nature, it's typically more decentralized than business travel. And I want to try and understand how that impacts control and oversight of travel spend, particularly in an environment like we're seeing now, where management, visibility of cost is so important. So can you maybe just talk a little about, the challenges that an environment like we're seeing now creates, and how you're trying to combat the more decentralized nature of spend that we see within our segment?
Absolutely. So I think very similar to what Jason was just touching on. Yes, we have seen big increase in price, and having a kind of declustered M&E offering. So although we sit in corporate travel, we very much run a separate M&E program to a separate business travel program. And in our M&E, we don't run a preferred hotel program, unlike the way we manage that in business travel. The advantage to that and the unique value proposition was always to give the meeting owners that broad choice of whether they want to source in hotels, venues, historic venues like castles, libraries, whatever it may be. So that's kind of the unique value proposition we bring to our meeting bookers. But I think the key to managing and keeping, helping with program leakage is to have a good IT platform. So we do have one of the best, and we do push all meetings to be registered. So that gives us, as much as we can ask, oversight of all costs. Of course, there is always going to be some leakage. And we try to work that out through our expense codes, through our payment cards and tracking, and through our business travel. I do join the performance reviews with our big hotel chains, and it's understanding M&E spend at those hotel chains. So at least we get an idea for the major chains where there may be leakage. And we do that through the good partnership that we have with Shell and all of our vendors. So that's kind of the way we're looking at, how we manage it in a declustered way.
Yeah, I think it's really important to call out the fact that it is such a complex segment versus point-to-point business travel, for example. And I'll maybe defend our segment for a moment. I think spend is spread across a myriad of suppliers. So you've obviously got your traditional travel vendors in there, but you might also have external speaker costs, offsite dinners, activity costs, and you talked about a centralized tech platform there, which I think is critical. But a lot of these supplies that you're buying in, they don't sit on a centralized platform like the GDS. So that in itself makes it a challenge to track spend. And additionally, booking a venue for your meeting isn't typically a live transaction in the same way that you might book an airfare or a hotel bed night. And that, again, kind of presents an immediate risk to the visibility of that transaction. So that's something that we might come back to a little later if we've got time. But
just let me add on that, Dan. So exactly as, the very transactional nature of business travel, you really know your costs pretty much live as they're happening. Whereas for M&E, we have 90 to sometimes 120-day period of reconciliation costs because things are changing at that event live. So by the time you get everything paid from your AV, F&B, ground transport, you really only understand the true cost of your event after that reconciliation period.
Yeah, it's really fair. So let's stick with this sort of theme of decentralization, but maybe look a little bit more inwards at our respective businesses. and in particular the dispersed workforce trend that's become commonplace for many of us both during and post-pandemic. So I just want to come to each of you in turn. Jason, I'll come to you first, just to understand sort of your workforce or office policy for each organisation, but then I'd like to get your perspective on whether that's having a specific impact on the way in which people are coming together and ultimately sort of your overall meeting spend.
Yep, and I think so for myself, working from home, obviously COVID, as many people have been and stuff, we've got I think quite a lot of our workforce, working from home or on flexible contracts and things like that. So I go to the office, once a month or once, twice a month, etc. For those really important face-to-face meetings, and where you can get the value of having a face-to-face meeting. Outside of that, again, I work on a lot of different categories. So I work with America quite a lot. I work with, different countries in Europe. So, the time zones and stuff, I don't want to just go to the office just to sit in a booth, just on my own. I could do that at home. So, and I think that's where a lot of people are seeing the value in working from home, not having to commute and things like that. And just having that flexibility with family and things as well. In terms of meeting spend, I think our sales guys, we've seen 2020, 21 and 22 our spend was down, but now our spend is looking to go up in terms of budget and stuff. And I think that's around the congresses, but I think that's also picking out the meetings that will really add value, and having those face-to-face interactions, and what that really means for the team and stuff. So I think we're probably picking and choosing a little bit better, but still having that spend there to add value on what we do.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Jason. And Jennifer, similar question to you, really. I know you've been very involved in sort of workforce strategy at Shell. So can you elaborate a little bit more about how that's playing into some of the meeting trends that you're seeing?
Yes, absolutely. So I think the big driver on bringing people back, return to office, and we do have a very flexible, post-COVID, we still have a very flexible working policy. Most people are in 1 to 3 days a week, and I think our building occupancy is back up to about 60, especially Tuesdays to Thursdays. So it's very healthy. But what's really drawing people into the office are meetings. So when there is a key meeting, collaboration, social events, that's bringing people in. But also we had the challenges post-COVID that our real estate portfolio changed a lot. So we looked to put in more collaboration space, which is absolutely great. But the way the office has changed, we're really missing that large space. So that still is a big need for M&E external sourcing, even when the offices have healthy occupancy. And we work very closely with our real estate colleagues to provide the same external meeting experience as internal meeting experience. And what I mean by that is the, ergonomics, accessibility, agile tech, these kind of things. So we do work very closely, but we have a very healthy return to meetings and return to the office here in Shell.
That's good. I think the last piece I'll pick up on there, because I think that really speaks to maybe the culture at Shell. And I think if there's much as I don't like to celebrate COVID, I think some of the outcomes are certainly positive. And I think we saw this initial surge in demand through the recovery period, but there was a lot of speculation that would plateau after that initial drive to get people back together. But I think the reality is organizations are recognizing the value of bringing people together, particularly to drive culture, as you spoke about there. So I think historically, our segment's not had a great name for itself because we've struggled to articulate the value that meetings bring. But I think particularly in a cost-focused environment like we've identified that we're in, I think organizations are not only doing a better job of articulating that value, but really recognizing the inherent value that meetings deliver. So I think that, for me, has been a real positive for our segment. Let's stick with people and that theme and question whether events are now increasingly sort of attendee-centric. So in particular, well-being has become increasingly prominent as a component of events and workplace strategy in general post-COVID. So Jennifer, I'll stick with you here to talk about the ways in which you see well-being feeding into your event strategy.
Absolutely, Dan. So I think and I hate to say it, but just to touch back on COVID again, when people were coming and returning back to the office, it was very much about work-life balance. Come in the days that you have a need to be in the office, look after yourself. We had all the big well-being efforts through COVID, mental health, etc. And now that's really continued on as a legacy, that now people, when they are meeting, whether in the office or out of the office, they want to take benefit of those same well-being things. It's really the focus on a lot of things that we do. So whether it's about building your agenda, making sure you have plenty of space time, allowing people that time for a wellness moment, bringing in a yoga or Pilates instructor, or also having that time where they can choose and it's just blank time. You fill that in the best way you want to, whether that's a walk or something is informal. Some people do prefer checking their emails or making their calls. So it's about building in that time into the plan that is something that suits everybody from a DEI cultural perspective. To find that one single well-being solution that suits everybody really isn't going to exist. So it's about being flexible and agile how you approach the well-being aspect.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there. And Jason, I put that question to you, but I think Jennifer's rightly called out. This is a very sort of individual topic and it can mean different things to different people. So how are you seeing that emerging within Amgen?
Yeah, no, exactly the same. And I think it's, that breakout space or that time, like Jennifer mentioned, to kind of do what makes you guys tick, or make you as an individual tick. So for me personally, if I'm at a meeting, off site for a day or two, I get a bit twitchy when I've got some emails and stuff. So like Jennifer rightly says, for me, having a coffee, breakout space, 20 minutes, half hour, just to check a few emails, reply to the urgent ones and that kind of thing. I suppose mentally I feel a little bit better knowing I've not got so much to go home to and that kind of thing. But yeah, all the other things as well around well-being and doing the yoga and stuff like that. I was at Download last weekend and they had that on the Saturday morning. I didn't attend, but yeah, just all these kind of opportunities I think for people to mentally be better. They're all the kind of good aspects that people are now taking into consideration, and they are part of what a meeting is, and getting everyone together, etc.
Yeah, I think demonstrating that it's been a consideration you're planning is the important thing here.
Yep.
I think we've identified there, it's very hard to check the box with one thing for all people. It is very individualistic, but I think, one of the things I've seen at many events I've attended in the last probably 18 months is just those elongated break times. So just as you've said there, Jason, that ability that if you need to, check out the meeting for 20 minutes, half an hour, go and do some emails. If that's your way of kind of mentally maintaining that balance, I think just ensuring that it's been a consideration throughout your programming and planning is really important. But it is an individual. Jennifer, I think you use the word sort of cultural there. It can be culturally sensitive. Some of these things are very different from one culture to another, but that links us nicely to a topic that is of critical importance, which is DE&I. It's an area we could have and we might well dedicate our entire time to in the future. So it's maybe hard to do it justice in the short time that we've got, but event owners are becoming increasingly aware of DEI considerations when both planning meetings, but also building programs. I think for the purpose of this dialogue, I'm going to focus in specifically on accessibility. And Jennifer, can I ask you to speak about the way in which that's being sort of integrated within your program and your individual event programming?
Yes, so we had about 2 years ago, so we've right at the meeting request form, the start of the meeting, we started a prompt for it says, do you have any accessibility requirements? And this is really just intended as a prompt. Most people don't know everybody that's coming to their meeting from the beginning, but it is a prompt to think about what type of meeting space you require that's going to suit all people, but also to have that conversation with your meeting participants, have it open, what is going to make somebody feel inclusive in that meeting. And if it's something as simple as, the obvious requirements are clear. You need, for some people, there'll be mobility, you need step-free, you need accessible rest facilities, etc. But for other people, there'll be neurodivergent requirements. We know some people aren't comfortable in elevators, lifts, revolving doors. So it's having those conversations about how you can make that meeting the most accessible. Then when you go to venue sourcing, having that conversation with our vendors there and making sure that you've got everything in place. And we encourage people not just to think about the long-term accessibility, but also those temporary needs. Perhaps somebody's just on crutches, has something which is a temporary situation, but also that they need some consideration for that particular meeting. And it also falls into our kind of duty of care for people, because in the event of any evacuation, as we would have on-site evacuation plans for those less able, we want to extend that to make sure that people can get out safely, whether they're attending a meeting on-site or off-site.
Yeah, I think this for me is a really interesting topic. So much of it is really around, being aware, raising awareness within your organization and within your sort of workforce and your communities. But it's definitely a topic we intend to dig into further. We've actually had some dialogue with our counterparts on the DEI committee at GBTA to see how we can collaborate with them to look at this further, specific to the meetings and events segment. So more to come there. But I want to sort of switch gears for a moment and just talk for a moment about technology. It's a topic that is always there as a trend, but it's constantly shifting in terms of where the focus is. Right now, we're seeing the use of event technology during the sort of sourcing, booking, planning phases increasing, particularly in the small and simple meeting space. And I think whilst that's been a consequence of the pandemic, where everyone's got reduced resources and they're looking to drive efficiencies, I'd actually argue it's always been an area, even pre-pandemic, where opportunities have existed to streamline. So, Jason, I want to come to you here and just ask in what ways are you looking to technology to help you drive efficiencies for your program?
Yeah, so obviously we're using, a booking tool, meeting request form and that kind of stuff, and all the data that comes out of that. And Jennifer mentioned reconciliation after. All of that data is obviously really important in terms of, what we're spending, who we're spending it with, how we're spending it, and that kind of stuff. In also spend capture forms. For us, we're looking across, Europe and our agencies and things. And I think we're kind of in its infancy of what we're doing, or in terms of our program. But we found an area whereby, smaller meetings or smaller countries, in the region, whereby, they might not necessarily command or demand an agency support, but what we're seeing is, potentially, a booking app and things like that could be, a really good solution for our, meeting bookers locally to do it themselves, within our GMM, within our, policy of meetings management and things like that. And that's where we see technology really helping us and that kind of stuff, because there may have been some leakage previously because they would have just done it on their own, but now we can potentially look at it and manage it via an app or via a booking tool and that kind of thing. So that's for us, that's where we see a real opportunity, and we're learning in this space still, it's still moving forwards and things. So and I think many people are on this journey, right? And just trying to understand what the opportunities are, but then also utilizing it to their advantage, the technology side.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's increasingly prominent on people's radars. I mean, this is sort of the business that I'm in, so it's a topic very close to my heart. Not only are we seeing increased interest, we are seeing increased adoption. You rightly addressed there, different organizations are at different levels of maturity with this, but we're seeing a huge spike in our data this year in terms of volume of accounts, volume of usership that really want to get a handle. And there's some low-hanging fruit here because there is a lot of opportunity to drive visibility and control of spend in this area.
Yep.
I want to sort of start to wrap up our conversation, but no trends dialogue would be complete at the moment without a nod to sustainability. Much like many of our other topics, it's really hard to do it justice in just a few minutes because there are many layers as it relates to meetings, whether that be at a policy level, getting visibility into data at the point of sale, or how you execute your events with sustainability in mind. The fact is 80% of respondents to the GBT trend survey indicated that sustainability is a consideration for their organization when planning meetings and events. Now, Jennifer, organizations such as your own have got obviously very robust objectives at an enterprise level, but how are you supporting those objectives within your meetings program?
Well, you're right on that, Dan. And of course, sustainability and supporting our corporate strategy, powering progress, ambition to net zero is something that trickles down throughout our organization. So in meeting and events, we absolutely have done our, doing our part and what we can in sourcing sustainable venues. So right now we do this at sourcing. We encourage everybody to opt and have at least a sustainable venue on their proposals. But we also acknowledge that, we're not at the same level globally. So somebody sourcing in Lagos to Houston to London to Amsterdam will all have different requirements and different responses back. But we do want to, it's all about starting to make steps. If we waited before we implemented sustainable meetings in our meetings program until we had the solutions for everything, I think we would never get started. So it's all about working with our vendors, understanding what their sustainable credentials are, adding those into RFP, encouraging our meeting requesters to look at sustainable options. And we know sometimes cost is something to consider, as well as the location of the venue, but at least we're having the conversations and putting that requirement in the RFPs so that our meeting budget holders can have the discussion and make wise choices.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you acknowledge there, and we've said this a couple of times through the conversation, that it's important you start somewhere. And I think in this area in particular, it's really important to be pragmatic. And I think in general society, we all know we need to be further along the path than we are. But you're right in saying we have to start somewhere. So, be pragmatic and ensure that there is some kind of acknowledgement within your program, your policy, your event execution towards sustainability. And then you can build and iterate on top of that. But, be realistic. You cannot expect to do everything out of the gate. And I think some of that comes down to sort of some broader industry challenges that we have that are specific to the meeting space. So we know, hotel specific emissions data is still not freely available in any sort of public forum. So, a lot of the data is still based on some of the DEFRA market averages. You talk there about, at least picking a green venue. That's a great starting point. But we know that some of the green certifications are really just an indication that a hotel might have demonstrated some sort of initiative is in place. We've still got more work to do there to be able to benchmark one green venue against another. So I think, I was talking earlier about, I think it was technology or program maturity. The complexity of meetings makes it really hard to pinpoint specific emissions across the entire scope of an event. A flight from A to B is much more straightforward than a meeting for 50 people that might have offsite dinners, activities. So, I think there's some great brand specific initiatives. I'll give Accor a shout out, who launched a tool last year for being able to measure your carbon emissions. Also credit the likes of Thrust Carbon, who are really trying to innovate and drive the industry forward in this respect. But I'll come back to your original point. There are different levels of adoption. It is certainly an area where meetings lags business travel in terms of both technical capability and maturity. But we have to start somewhere. So thank you for calling those out. So with that, we ought to be bringing this to a close. I've certainly learned a lot from you both. So we must make a note to do this again sometime. Thank you both, Jennifer and Jason, for your time and your input today. I've been Dan Humby. You've been listening to The Business of Travel, the official podcast of the Global Business Travel Association. For more information about GBTA and its work, visit gbta.org. Be sure to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. But until next time, thanks for listening.